Thanks for the introduction. I'm very excited to be discussing a topic that's actually very, very close to my heart. The SME space is something that, I very strongly believe in. That if it doesn't develop, your economy is not going to kind of develop. And, today we are discussing about the stimulus package that the government kind of has been speaking about and doing for the SME segment. Very quick, good morning, panelists. Good to have all of you here. Some known faces. So hi, looking forward to this chat today.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, we've been given, these guys are very brutal. So they've given us only, 40 minutes to kind of do this. For those of you who've been on my panels, you all will know I will even pull it to 75, but there are other sessions after us. So I'm going to request, we've got 5 questions. So if you could, do your responses in 1.5 to 2 minutes, that would be good in terms of, the best will come out. Second is also for our editorial team, it's easier to edit a shorter response and put up the stuff. I wanted to kind of say that, the SME segment that has been going through a very tough patch and a very rough patch always, and even worse since the pandemic. It's just not about jobs, okay? It's not just about employment, but you have to have a healthy SME segment, for your entire businesses and, for your economy to survive and thrive. At the end of the day, all large enterprises source from SMEs, and without that, it becomes very difficult. Just a very quick example before I get into my first question is that Germany, I'm told, has 80% plus SMEs, okay? 80% of that economy works on SMEs, whereas the names that we know from Germany are Bosch, Mercedes, BMW, Siemens. But the fact is that, that economy thrives on an SME ecosystem, and we need to kind of do it. It's taken ahead. I'm going to try and address every question to everyone, but there might be cases, depending on timing, where I might have to cut back. Let me start with my, Sandhya, morning, I will follow the protocol and we will go with the lady first. So, I'm going to start with you with the first question. What's your take, on this entire, what's your opinion on the entire stimulus that the government has announced and, earlier and now? And would you say that, this is adequate?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity. I feel very privileged to be part of this group and being able to be speaking at this forum. I think a little bit of context I would want to start with, which is to say that what we call as micro or small enterprises, what we see as micro and small is probably only a small chunk of the real micro and small of this country. If we actually take a step back and see, I think this must be the largest sector employing people after agriculture and construction. If we, maybe more than 100 million people must be engaged in this sector. But many of the micro and small enterprises are much 4-member shop, 5-member shop. And in that context, when I come to the stimulus, and I think the stimulus, yes, the heart is in the right place. There is a lot of effort and initiative that has gone into bringing the stimulus to the micro and small enterprises. But is it actually reaching them is my question. And is it reaching adequately, and is it percolating to the bottom of the pyramid? And that is where the real economic growth is going to come. So in the interest of time, I'll pass on the opportunity to the co-speakers to add on.
So I just want to summarize what you're saying is, one is the adequacy, but second is you're saying, is there a process and is it reaching properly? Now, this could be an issue not just with the government, but also for them to have registered. Okay, yes. Because as you know, and I'm an Indian, out and out Indian. We are very poor with paperwork, and
yes.
So
yes.
That could be another issue. But I'm just the questioner in this one. Let's move to Vikas. Vikas, what's your response to this stimulus?
Thanks, Hoshie, and thanks for the opportunity, Businessworld. So I echo what Sandhya has said. But before that, I think Government of India, I would say, keeping in mind the financial constraint or the budgetary constraint the economy had at that point in time, had done a decent job in terms of extending the required financial support or monetary support to the MSME sector. The times were very unprecedented. It was very, very new to all of us. And I think the government was also struggling with the same thing. So any amount of stimulus would have been inadequate considering the very, very vast unorganized sector in India and a big blow from the pandemic on that sector. Now, if we look at what government has been doing, whether it is emergency credit link guarantee scheme or it is keeping the repo rate low, the idea is to make sure that the liquidity is there in the system and the credit can be provided to the sectors where it is needed most. But I think as Sandhya was trying to point out, there was some design flaws in the way the stimulus was designed. While the intention was right, but it has not reached to the vulnerable ones or where it was required. If you look at the data points, the government did a 5,000 crore credit facility for 5 million street vendors. Only 40% of the vulnerable ones have actually got that credit, and only 40% of that 5,000 crore is actually disbursed in, which is very unfortunate. Even if you look at your ECLG scheme, Emergency Credit Link Guarantee Scheme, there was a recent survey where close to 2,000 firms were surveyed to take a feedback how that scheme actually helped them. So it was found that 80% of the total borrowers could only get 30% of the total disbursed amount. So there was clearly an unequal distribution of the stimulus, and the money was going, while I won't say where it was not needed, but money was actually not going to the most vulnerable ones. And if you look at some of the reasons for that, the guarantee scheme was completely focused on the players who already have access to the credit. But what about the SMEs or MSMEs who does not have access to the credit? What about the startup ecosystem? So I think there was intention was right, but the design possibly was flawed, I would say.
Thank you, Vikas. Well said. Ashish, would love to hear your perspective. You're with a large group too. So,
I think I quite endorse well to what Vikas said. And just to give it, in India, whenever there's an impact, so these MSME like the GST, the demonetization, they had a huge impact. But the pandemic, of course, brought them to knees. And when the government came with a scheme, which Vikas just mentioned on the ACLGS, while it was a game changer for the government, it addressed the liquidity for some of the businesses because they could draw 20% provided they had an outstanding loan as a Feb 2020. This was, of course, one side. If you see, there was a benefit because it was a government guarantee scheme. The banks could lend to the borrower at a cheaper cost. But as Vikas mentioned, only for the MSME, those who has access to credit. The irony was that those who didn't had much really had to depend on other benefits announced by the government under various measures. While the government did announce a part of 20 trillion INR stimulus last year, in terms of adequacy, the government stimulus seems adequate, but in the sense that the 3 trillion ECLJ stimulus hasn't really been fully deployed yet, which means that it is yet to channelize to the real users. While the MSME ministers are proactively announcing various supports to the sector, but I think it's still a long way to go to really see the road to recovery for this sector goes beyond a point. And ultimately they are a very large employment base, be it hospitality, travel, tourism, ancillary industries. They need to really get the real benefit. Particularly people had no access to credit in the past because the reference point for the lending was only if you have an outstanding loan, say of 100 crore, then you get 20 crore. But that was not good enough because normally access to credit is pretty to a structured place, while we know the MSME consists of by and large a huge unstructured market which works in its own different way, but yet it caters to large requirement of the economy. So I think that's my take on the stimulus by the government to the MSME.
Thank you, Ashish. Anoop.
I agree with all of them, but then government has done. I think the best thing government did was to revise the MSME definition and brought a larger number of players in the revised MSME definition. The only thing is all the schemes which government announced was basically not providing the credit but guarantee to the credit, and credit had to be given by the banks and the NBFCs. Though banks were given credit lines by the RBI, they could have given credit at a lower rate. But unfortunately, NBFCs, which deal with most of the MSMEs, particularly micro and small industries, the credit rates were pretty high. So for all those MSME to survive, giving interest at 13% and 14% do not seem feasible in the long run. So I think my take is that government should have provided direct stimulus, direct cash support, direct lending, and the funds of funds scheme which they announced has not been launched so far. I think that would have been a game changer, that funds of funds scheme, where the credit would have been provided to most of the MSME companies, even if they were stressed. But unfortunately, the scheme has still not come into the space. And secondly, most of the MSME in this country are unregistered. Only a few, I think, are in the registered category, and it's very difficult for them to have access to credit. So some schemes have to come to get them on the registered block so that things improve for them in the future.
Thank you, Anoop. I want you to stay with me on the second question because you spoke about what the government needs to do. So let me just broaden this question a little bit. But what, according to you, are the requisites, the imperatives? As we are assuming India is unlocking, we don't know about the third wave. I just read this morning that there was the first case of Delta in Bombay. But we are going to remain optimistic and say that the country is going to unlock fully shortly. What, according to you, are the things that need to be done on the road to recovery?
Let me answer this thing. The first thing is government spending has to go up. Government has to spend, create opportunities for all the sectors to have their businesses back to normal. If the spending doesn't happen, I think we are entering into a stagflation type of economy for sure. Because this pandemic, I think 2 phases of this pandemic has really affected people and their spending capacities. If you see tourism sector where we land, 20 million people have lost jobs, which is a huge number. And those who are continuing maybe are continuing with reduced salaries, and so their spending power is low. So if you have to boost the sectors, you have to allow people to get employment, and employment, the first thing is the government has to generate opportunities for employment. All those trade restrictions, licenses have to be restrained or limited for a particular period of time. This is the first thing we have to happen. Then for MSME sector, I think MSME sector, except for this ESI benefit, I don't know how many of them get the ESI benefit or not, or the PF benefit if they're getting 15,000 or lower than 50,000 salary, where you have the subsidy scheme announced by the government if they employ more people. But unfortunately, I think medical insurance is the need of the day today. So government has to come out with a medical insurance scheme so that all of them are covered through medical insurance, where they can move to any hospital, not just restricted to ESI sector. That is one thing to happen. I think these are the few steps if they can take, then the confidence will come, because we also don't know whether this third wave is likely to come or it's not likely to come. But let's hope for the best. Let's hope that things improve a lot. Otherwise, there will be major shake-up in the entire sector. At least I don't want this third wave to happen.
Yeah, I think none of us want to for it to happen. Ashish, one of your large businesses under InterGlobe is the airlines. I don't know the airlines number, but one point of time you guys were the leading airlines. What's your perspective on the road to recovery? What needs to be done?
So the sentiments are most important while we consider this. And the recent concept which has come out is something known as revenge travel. And there was a reflection, the flight ticket from here to London was costing 4 lakhs. It it was actually a reverse travel. So if you see the population of vaccinated in the country, 45 crore with the first dose and 8 crore with both the doses, and fortunately I'm one among them. I think that's most important for the road to recovery. The sentiments. Once the sentiments improves, people will start traveling. People will start moving here and there. Then comes the question of business normalcy. Once the business normalcy starts returning, then of course MSME will always at the forefront of revival, and they're likely to bounce back quicker than they used to be. While the banks have already restructured loans close to 1 trillion already under new schemes announced last year, the industry has, particularly the travel and tourism, has laid off a lot of employees, and many others are working with quite a reduced paychecks. Uh, Currently, we have to start. We are basically high consuming economy. The consumption pattern has to increase. The consumption pattern will increase only when the income increases, and that will happen only when the employability is back to the same level, the income level of the employees and many other businesses will come to the same levels, which hopefully, while I am the view that the third wave will have a very lukewarm response, given the learnings we had in the second wave, given the vaccination across the globe, and we can see those silver linings started already. While the occupancy in some of the hospitality started growing, the airline will slightly pick up in the times to come with more aircrafts, getting opened up as the economy opens up. While the tourist destinations, they have already shown weekends, I would say, huge surge in the growth of the tourist. So there is a resilience among the people as they brace, every new day with adequate safety measures. Of course, has to happen. The road to recovery is, of course, a big essential without any further nationwide lockdowns, which looks to be unlikely. Like the last time, virtually every state took a decision and then the whole country was technically locked down. The safety measures, of course, is one very important. And from the government side, while the economy has already braced the headwinds well, and the timing seems to be right for to help businesses sustain and retain their core strength to thrive now. From the government side, I think investment in sustainable infrastructure is very important. Build the resilience for the most vulnerable among the economy, and encourage long-term change in behavior, which will definitely happen only by investing in sustainable infrastructure. Like I would say, sustainable. There has been a lot of examples, like you start investing in solar, thermal, and other sort of sustainable infrastructure in the economy, which creates a lot of infrastructure apart from the roads and other stuff happening. And of course, healthcare is one important point. I would just sum up that sentiments is the key, and we hope so that there is nothing known as third wave. It just comes and goes, provided I am sure that as far as government responsible, we are equally responsible. You can't make hospitals, to stop road accidents. Ultimately, we as every citizen has to be very, very careful in how we demonstrate our behavior in the current uncertain environment.
Ashish, thank you. Well said. But I just wanted to kind of share that I think the responsibility, none of us are on the third wave, but the responsibility somewhere lies with us. I haven't flown, which is not very good news for you, for 1.5 years, but I had a personal emergency. So I had to fly out of Delhi last Friday. And I should have been the one in a hurry because there was a personal emergency, but I was following those social distancing norms and stuff like that. First of all, there's been traffic out on the roads and all, and you worry whether this is actually because of livelihood. But I must tell you, I got pushed around in the airport for just standing where I was in. So people, and finally I had to tell them, guys, do you understand? We have COVID. Relax, the flight's not going anywhere. Even my flights at the same time. But I think a lot of this will have to be driven by the citizens individually, because second wave, in my assessment, would have not happened had all of us taken care. Awesome. Vikas, let's kind of move to you.
No, thanks, Hoshie. I completely understand where Ashish and Anoop are coming from, because their sectors are impacted very severely. I think it's quite an interesting conundrum if I look at it, whether there should be in such a situation when there is a massive blow not only on the businesses but also on the demand side as well, because the pay cuts, unemployment rates are at an all-time high, and so on and so forth. So what should you attack on? Should you be attacking on the demand side, or should you be fixing the supply side problem? So it's an interesting conundrum. I think in my perspective, both needs to be addressed simultaneously. You can't just focus on one and the other remains unattended. In the industry where I'm coming from, the real estate sector, we clearly are observing that the demand sentiment is recovering. Where anyways the real estate was going through very, very difficult times for the last 3-4 years because of the structural reforms which were happening in India back to back. I think this pandemic has definitely improved the demand sentiment. But the supply side issues, the balance sheet problems of most of the real estate developers is still a big challenge. And that is why we are not seeing the vibrancy in the sector which is needed. So if you ask me what is needed or what the government should be doing for the road to recovery, I think infra and real estate sectors are two most important sectors for any economy. It's like a backbone because this generates massive amount of employment, and this also enables almost 200 different allied sectors which are directly or indirectly associated with infra and real estate. Infra, clearly the government has a lot of focus and the government is taking all the right steps in the right direction. But I think real estate is one sector where a little bit of more attention is needed from the government. While interest rates are down, which is helping the demand to come back, but how do we extend the credit to the developers? Because real estate largely is dependent on the credit. It requires massive amount of capital, and unless and until the developers has access to the capital, it will continue to struggle for the recovery. That's one area. The second area, I think India as an economy has today one of the most vibrant startup ecosystem. I think that is one area. While the government has launched quite a few initiatives, whether it is Make in India, Startup India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, but I think we need to double click these schemes and see how do we extend or create an inclusive scheme for the tech startups, for the digital startups who are typically started by young entrepreneurs who doesn't have any experience of running a business or running a corporate structure. How do we ensure that we make their life easy? How do we make sure that we create a platform so that they can access to the domestic capital? Is there a way to provide credit schemes to them? How do we create an environment where people get trained on the vocations? So talent is still a big challenge for the startup ecosystem. So I think these are 2-3 areas where the government should definitely put concerted effort, because this is the need of the hour as we speak today.
Thank you. Sandhya.
So I'd like to add to what Vikas said, that there is demand recovery, but the challenge I think is the predictability of the demand, because there is so much start-stop that the entire economy is seeing, but more so for small entrepreneurs, because say it's a small shop with say 50 people, 5 of them test positive. The shop has to close down for 5-6 days and then restart. But just because I'm closing down for 5-6 days, I have to continue to pay my power bill. So that doesn't go away. I have to continue to pay all my overheads, my rent. So I think there is a huge impact which is both on the working capital side and also on the run costs, the fixed costs, and being able to balance them. I think there is a challenge. And if there is some way the government can support some of these in a very focused way. So for example, US had this paycheck protection program where there was a definitive assistance to ensure that the payout disbursal happens to employees. So some sort of maybe if someone has to close down because of COVID, give them a 1 week no electricity bill allowance, things like that. So the problem has to be solved at a very micro level. Macro policies are good. They do help in an overall stimulus and bringing money into the economy. But if we have to solve the problems of small enterprises, micro-targeting is very, very important. All the more if you look at sectors. For example, auto has seen reasonable recovery. But let's take an industry like textile, still struggling. Tourism, in even dire state. So having a one-size-fits-all approach is also not going to be able to percolate to the across the board, and therefore more micro-targeting and sectoral schemes will also help on the road to recovery.
Thank you, Sandhya, for that. I think we need a huge amount of data and technology deployment. And, again, I'm just going back, I want to go back to what I said initially. I think after you responded to the first question, that as Indians, we're just so worried or lackadaisical about registering ourselves, and we don't bother. So this is when it's kind of hitting people. But I know several people who tried to get the benefits that were passed by the government, but they had not bothered to do their paperwork ever in life. In the interest of time, I'm going to try and compress a question or two. Let's start with, Vikas this time. I'll skip question 3. Vikas, what do you think can be done to help small and emerging businesses? Now we're just talking of the small segment. We partially answered this question. To quicker financial recovery. I think it's very cyclical, but how do we give them a flip? How do we give them a turbo boost?
So on that particular point, I think we need to attack this problem from multiple sides and not only one side. One, definitely, I agree with Sandhya. It can't be a big scheme which is a mechanical scheme and doesn't look at the specific problems faced by a particular segment of MSME. Now, you've created that emergency credit link guarantee scheme, but that included anyone up to the turnover of 200 crores. Now, a business which is having a turnover of 5 crore versus a business which is having a turnover of 100 crore are very different businesses, and their needs and their requirements are very different. So I agree with Sandhya. I think, and today, Hoshie, I don't think data is a problem with the government. Government is sitting on massive amount of data, and they can actually dissect and create different cohorts of different industry segments and different businesses to extend the required support which is needed by them. So we don't need to paint everyone with the same brush and say this is what we are doing. That's one area. Second area is, as I was talking about, I think one is directly focusing on MSME, but also focusing on, like, take an example of tourism as a sector, or take an example of aviation as a sector. Now, these two sectors, there are many MSME businesses which are completely dependent on these sectors. Now, unless and until tourism revives, there are massive number of travel agents or people whose livelihood is dependent on tourism. They cannot come back to the normal life, right? Similar is an example of real estate sector. Now, real estate sector, massive number of employment generator, a lot of some 70-80 different industries are allied and MSME sectors which are directly linked to real estate. Unless and until we revise some of these industries through government intervention and policy intervention, it will be very difficult to have a larger impact on MSME.
Thank you. Anoop?
I agree with Vikas that government intervention is required to revive certain sectors. But I also feel there's a fundamental question. Every time this COVID happens, they simply close down tourism sector where we lend. So all restrictions come to tourism, whereas other sectors are allowed to continue. This time they're allowed to continue, but they closed tourism. But I don't understand this logic. When other sectors can continue, tourism with all precaution can also continue. While eating, why eating in a restaurant is bad? When there's a medical, I think it has been proven that through eating, you cannot get COVID. the food goes to stomach and the COVID virus dies. So that is not where, so they close everything. Unfortunately, okay, I agree. Even if it is, you want to save people from getting COVID and you feel hotel is a hotspot for getting in COVID, but then you have to help the sector out. The first thing you have to do that you don't, you have to change your classification norms, because you say if they don't service the loan within a particular period of time, they will become NPA. Then give some relaxations, allow restructuring to happen without provisions for banks to do that. Because we all know the sector has suffered and suffered for reasons which were beyond the control of those people. If you shut down anything, then who is responsible? Neither the owner is responsible, neither the lender is responsible. So you have to relax, but those relaxations have not come. Even as a lender, if we have to restructure, we have to make a 10% provision on that account, which is a huge provision. So that means I am taking a hit on my balance sheet for making that provision. So those norms have to be relaxed by the government at least. Then secondly, all the hotels, they have to pay the excise fee. Whether the bar is closed, the excise fee is payable. The electricity fees payable. I think some of the states declared, have now declared this tourism hotel sector under industry. But still the discoms have to be told not to charge commercial rates. Some of them have gone to court, challenging the government reclassification of the sector as industry. So I think the government has to come out with a centralized policy along with states to give certain reliefs to the sector. And then credit has to be provided for those MSME people who were not having any credit facilities. They were working on their own capital. Now is the time they want capital. Now who will provide them capital? So any schemes which have come, they say if you are a borrower, you are entitled to have more debt in your balance sheet. Whether it can be serviced later or not is a different question altogether. But the persons who are not having a debt, they also need a debt now to survive and sustain for this sector. So this is my say on this.
Thank you so much. Sandhya, your perspective?
So maybe I just want to focus on one aspect of this road to recovery, which is that the government is actually the biggest spender, biggest buyer of goods and services. And in some form, there has been focus. There was a public procurement policy which said 25% you have to buy from MSMEs, etc. But now, in continuing my earlier topic of micro-targeting, they have the good potential to micro-target and develop certain industries to say certain type of services, certain type of spends. I am only going to buy from MSMEs. It's not that 25%, it's not that you can be L1 plus X% and I will allow you, but I will only buy from MSMEs. So that then creates a level playing field that creates the demand that helps them recover. So the more focus that the government is able to bring in its own areas of control in terms of being able to enable the MSMEs find the opportunity to express their goods and services, be able to sustain their costs, be able to, the economy cannot recover without the MSME recovery. We could say that, we are expecting $40 billion of startup funds that are going to come into the economy, and therefore, there's going to be a big boom. Yes, maybe there will be a spending boom, but it'll be very lopsided. If we have to recover the economy in a more secular fashion, there has to be money that has to reach the MSME, and that can't just be aids and grants. People have to have opportunities to serve, and that's only the sustainable way to recover a sector. So that's my view.
Thanks, Sriram. So I don't know whether we'll have time for one more question, but I'm going to kind of link it to what you just said. It is the last question. Ashish.
So I think just to endorse what Anoop said, and of course, government has to really demarcate between the most impacted industry and the least impacted and moderately impacted. We understand that, of course, the tourism industry is most impacted. He rightly mentioned that the government dues of excise, the property tax, and so many levies, there has to be some concession coming. Apart from the specific, while the government is also proactively taking a lot of inputs from various bodies and representatives like CII, WTTC, HEI, FHRI, through the Niti Aayog. And in the ECLJ scheme, the last one which came, I was personally interacting with the Niti Aayog team, And we saw those coming inputs as a benefit to the industry, 40% up to 500 crore. While consumption has been our core strength, the government must focus in incentivizing the customers for the same. It could be in the form of GST rate reduction. It could be in the form of input credits. It could be against the individuals for the direct tax, like for LTA. Why once in 2 years? Please say that a person will get expenses not only for the travel tickets, including the hotel expenses, including the other expenses with a limit set. Those are the patterns which will increase the consumption pattern for the industry. Then coming to the lending sector, I think there has to be some independence giving for the banks as well. Like in overseas, banks decide their own refi up to 5 years. They independently decide. But here everybody looks for the RBI, and then the whole process takes a lot of time. While the RBI has given a lot of moratorium and other things to the industry, there has to be some empowerment to the institutions where they can decide within the set guidelines. Then there are credit rating agencies, they're also behind the industry, like there's a negative outlook, so downgrade of ratings, and then ultimately it has impact on the costing and pricing and so many things as well. I think the important is that inputs from the industry needs to be incorporated with the real people on the ground, and then those has to be ultimately passed on to the industry, and of course and end users to the customers. So that's my broadly take on the road to recovery, which can't be in the same pattern like a 1 year budget policy. It has to be on a daily basis, and things has to be corrected on course correction as we move forward, given the constraints we have in the economy right now.
Thank you, Ashish. Generally, I know you want me to get off, but I have one last question, and I'm going to request all the panelists for Twitter kind of responses. Okay, and it is linked to the last question that we had planned. But I just want to ask you all that the government has a lot to do. The government absolutely has a lot to do, but all the large companies, all of you represent larger companies here. We all sit with much larger assets and issues. 70% plus of the GDP comes from larger companies. What do you all believe you all can do, okay, as corporates, to give these guys what is called the underbelly in the question, to help these guys revive? As corporate, and short answers, others they'll just switch us off, I think, or they'll drop a bomb into our rooms. So Ashish, yours first.
I think one simple question is that we need to encourage the small startups to come in the industry fold, and we need to really encourage and create a small kitty of fund for these guys of the MSME who are ancillary support to your industry. Even if you get a 5%, and then that would be good enough.
Thank you. So you're saying a private sector, large enterprise fund to support the ecosystem. That's kind of good. Very brilliant, good suggestion. I hope the editorial team is kind of taking that. Sandhya, yours?
I think one best way by which corporates can support is through effective vendors financing arrangements for the vendors, because they have a high, much better credit rating, and if they are able to extend that benefit, because they are going to pay them, that really enables the MSMEs to be able to get the credit line at a much affordable cost.
Editorial team, whoever was writing the story, another very good suggestion. Thank you. Vikas.
I'll go next. I'll just extend what Ashish mentioned. I think one is the private domestic capital participation. That's one way the corporates can help. Second is creating accelerator programs, or creating or co-opting these smaller enterprise or young startups or young businesses who are trying to solve a problem into the R&D wings, so that they can provide mentoring, provide support to scale their business ideas and take it to the next level.
Thank you, Vikas. Anoop, your last words.
Yeah, my take on this thing is that I think there should be a bill discounting exchange, where the smaller sector can get their bill discounted, who's dealing largely to the manufacturing sector. And for services sector, I think the support by way of collateral-free loans from the banking system would be a much better way for them to grow.
Thank you. I don't think they're going to allow me to sum up, but let me just attempt to say that there have been structural issues in the stimulus that has happened, and there's a lot to be done. Micro targeting, as Sandhya put, is critical, and I kind of agree with you. One size doesn't fit all. Corporate sector, I think I got some brilliant suggestions, and I don't know how we would, as a media house, help activate them, but I will speak to the editorial team and ensure that something comes out, a story comes out that reaches sufficient people for this. Thank you, lady. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time off to join us this morning. Appreciate your inputs. I'm sorry we didn't have more time. When we do these large events, it's always very time constrained. We'll be back with you for more inputs and more stories soon. Bhavna, I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.